Hey, greetings, everyone. Lieutenant Colonel Allen West, the Executive Director of the American Constitutional Rights Union and the ACRU Action Fund. Welcome for another episode of our Live Free TV. And want to thank you, and please join us at theacru.org. That is theacru.org. And also for the Committee to Support and Defend, which is our Veterans Constitutional Conservative Organization, the only one in the United States of America. Thanks so much for being here with us. You know, there's a lot of discussion going on right now about military readiness, but I think it's a little disingenuous. Everyone is talking about Senator Tommy Tuberville, the senator from Alabama, and the fact that he's holding up 315 general officer appointments and assignments over the fact that the Department of Defense is violating the Hyde Amendment by using taxpayer funds, allowing soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines to leave their military bases with their no restrictions on their leave. They don't have to use leave, and they get their expenses reimbursed for them to go murder their unborn baby. And I thought that once upon a time we cared about military families and about, the next generation of soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guardsmen, and now Space Force Guardians. I guess it's a little bit different. But I really want to talk about military readiness from the true perspective and not just the politicized perspective, because the military can continue on without 315 3- and 4-star generals. So to join me in a conversation today, we have retired United States Marine Corps Gunnery Sergeant Jessie Jane Duff, who is also an ambassador for the America First Policy Institute, as well as a Newsmax contributor and a dear friend of mine. Semper Fi, welcome to Live Free TV, Jessie Jane Duff. Thank you.
Hey, Semper Fi, Colonel. Thank you for inviting me.
Awesome. Let's kind of give folks a bit of your background about your service to the United States Marine Corps and the years and the deployments that you have. So kind of give us a little orientation to your service in the Corps.
Well, I served 20 years on active duty, retired the rank of Gunnery Sergeant. This is no small feat, simply because the Marine Corps, as everybody knows, is quite difficult. It's the smallest branch of service, and with that comes probably a very difficult standard in order to achieve that rank and that title Marine, the recruit training alone, along with all of the requirements to make it the 20 years. When I was on active duty, it was less than 6% women. Now it's probably up to 8%, maybe a little higher. But at the same time, of that 0.6%, well, of that 6%, only 15% of our active duty military do make it to retirement, which would make it 0.05% of that 6% women. So I'm kind of a unicorn out here to make it to retirement, which I'm quite pleased with. As a tractor trailer operator, I hauled for the infantry and ground units. I did not serve time in Iraq or Afghanistan. I want that to be very clear. People assume that just because you were in the Corps, you automatically got deployed all over to hardship. I did not. However, I did move 9 times in that 20 years. I consistently had to assist the infantry and wing units get their gear onboarded and offloaded off of ships and ensure that it was transported into the field, 29 Palms for desert warfare training, etc. My last command when 9/11 hit was actually at Marine Forces Pacific in Hawaii, the largest operational command in the United States Marine Corps. And with that, I was actually, it was about 5 a.m., maybe earlier, when the towers were hit. And I happened to be in my living quarters off base when a friend of mine called from Washington, D.C. and told me to turn the television on. I actually was doing homework at that time. I was finishing up college courses. And long story short, of course, I did not deploy with my command when they had gone off to Middle East, because the war actually hadn't taken on full-fledged to what we all know just recently ended in Afghanistan and just a few years ago with Iraq. But a lot of intense deployment and operational success while I was on active duty. So I don't want to mislead anybody here. I don't consider myself a hero for serving this country, as you probably are the same way, that we volunteer to serve. And yes, only 1% of this country does serve. But to me, always those that are heroic are those that have actually sacrificed their life, limb, or should be dead. Some of those Medal of Honor recipients that are still alive today, those are the true heroes, because when you are on active duty with the Marine Corps, you realize there's always somebody better than you. There's always somebody better. I was just happy to be able to maintain, keep up, and do what I did do. But it was an honor for me to serve, and I'm privileged to be here today with you.
Well, I could not agree with you anymore. And it is that honor and privilege to serve and, several generations in my family. And we did have a Marine in our family. Everyone has that black sheep of the family. That was my older brother who served in the Marine Corps in Vietnam. And it's interesting you brought up 9/11 because when 9/11 occurred, I was actually on an exchange assignment with the United States Marines
Mm.
at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. We just finished recognizing the 22nd remembrance of 9/11. What does that mean for you, especially when you think about where we are in Afghanistan and the debacle that resulted in the loss of 11 Marines, a soldier, and a sailor there
Yeah.
at Hamid Karzai International Airport?
Good timing for this transition to where we are today. First of all, it was exceptionally disrespectful for Joe Biden to have on his marker as being the first president who wasn't here representing the country, either in New York or at the Pentagon or even in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, made no attempt to ensure that his presence was there. There are consistent symposiums all over the world. He would not have been missed had he been absent or sent his, as we know, his incredible vice president who has the articulation of a potato salad. But for him not to be present was one. Two, to hand over $6 billion to Iran on the day that they negotiated the prisoner swap, to hand over the seized money that had apparently been kept by the U.S. that apparently was Iran's, but keep in mind, it wasn't Iran's. This was a previous leadership regime of Iran, and for the many people that have been killed by Iranians throughout the world because of the mere fact that they're the number one state sponsor of terrorism, which we all are aware of, that $6 billion should have been going to the victims of those tragedies. Every single person who had been a victim. Why on earth we felt some loyalty to return it, but that was such a slap in the face. Not only was he not here to be present, I don't want to hear this speaking in front of the troops. You and I we don't buy into that after service. Oh, well, he talked to the troops. Big deal. We would say in the Marine Corps, BFD. You can figure out the F stands for. But that's just nonsense to have that mindset that was going to placate the American people. And then of all days to hand over the $6 billion. Look, I would have been disgusted anyways, because here we go again under the Obama administration when Admiral Kirby, at the time for the State Department spokesperson, actually got caught by James Rosen lying because they were paying a ransom for prisoners. And, I don't like it when I hear these political pundits say, well, if it was your son or daughter, at the end of the day, we all understand the risk of traveling overseas. And we also know that the United States has always maintained that we do not negotiate with terrorists. We do not pay off, because all it does is increase the probability of future Americans being detained and tortured. And that's where we give an element of weakness. God bless the former governor of New Mexico who recently died, Richardson. He was a master negotiator, and he had often gotten many of our people that were overseas, despite who was in charge of the administration, released. God bless Donald Trump, over 50 some odd Americans. No, it was more than that. It was hundreds of Americans that got released in over 50 different countries that had been detained. Often you can do this quietly and without having to have some celebratory role in it. But no, of course, the Biden administration wants to do a victory lap on this. So 9/11 was a traumatic time, and these family members are still not overcome. I have not overcome that and never will. But to also know that they are trying to negotiate not having the architect of 9/11 not face the death penalty. Like what is going on here? Thousands of Americans died in one day, the largest death toll for Americans in one single day, and we're not going to have this man face the death penalty. What kind of it's again a resemblance of weakness. And when we talk about the Biden crime family and the 21 LLCs and the 21 that was filtering money to family members and $21 million alone that he profited while he was vice president by our adversaries, you have to start thinking this man is owned, and that's why his political decisions have been so elementary and so weak. He speaks in front of the United Nations and talks about how we got to get behind the Ukraine. 18 months into it, he's given the same exact speech for the last 2 years, talking about global warming and get behind the Ukraine. But we have not heard a strategy to stop this. We have not heard a strategy to get peace. All we hear is that essentially he wants to fund more war. Well, geez Louise, you have to wonder, how much money was in his coffers that has influenced his decisions that he has been making while he's been president of the United States.
Yeah, it's very interesting that we don't have a State Department that is issuing a travel warning for Iranian Americans not to go back to Iran, and we're making it very easy for Americans to be apprehended. And of course, when you show that you're willing to provide financial restitution to countries such as Iran, as you just articulated, the number one state sponsor of Islamic terrorism, you're just going to get more of that bad behavior. So it's pretty amazing to me. Now, let's talk about this readiness issue, because as I said in the papers, everyone is, down on Senator Tommy Tuberville. You're affecting military readiness because 315 3- and 4-star generals are not going to get promoted. Wah. The real readiness issue, and I'm sure you can understand this, when we have a Navy that is, their surface warfare fleet is smaller and trailing China, when we have the Chief of Naval Operations, who earlier this year testified before the Armed Services Committee that they do not have enough amphibious shipping to be able to battle positions. Don't you think that that is the real issue of readiness that we should be talking about?
Of course. Of course. I challenge everybody watching this podcast to simply pull up the Heritage Foundation Readiness Report from 20 that was published. They're going to have a new one coming out probably in another month. But last year's report simply, and I'm just going to read from it, that they basically graded all the military as weak. And they said this is the logical consequence of years of sustained use, underfunding, poorly defined priorities, wildly shifting security policies, exceedingly poor discipline in program execution, and a profound lack of seriousness across the national security establishment, even as threats to the U.S. interests have surged. That is just the preliminary to the report where they're talking about the results. And this is, again, going back to what you're talking about, the misplaced priorities of transgenders, where they are now, keep in mind, non-deployable. I don't want to hear about an equality issue. This is a readiness issue. And if somebody cannot deploy because they have to endure surgery or hormone therapy, I can't join the military if I need to have certain gastric bypass surgery, for goodness sake, high blood pressure, flat feet. But yet this is a detriment to the readiness, and that soldier, airman, Marine will have to be replaced, or in sailor will have to be replaced by a person who is not going through this surgery. So a lot of people don't realize that Donald Trump's administration actually allowed transgenders in. However, you had already had to experience the surgery. You had to be 5 years into it, already cleared by a doctor to not have any mental health issues, because we do know that there is a higher rate of suicide and other health. It is still called gender dysphoria. And, honestly, I had no beef with that. Somebody who had been female is now male and is now going to be a dentist in the Navy and is serving their duty. That's not really the major issue to me. But when you're going on active duty, how on earth, I don't even know the answer to this question, are they handling the transgender male who's now claiming to be female? Are they going to Marine Corps recruit training with women? Are they taking the Marine Corps female physical fitness test, but they haven't gone through the transition yet? Are they showering, or as we would use the term in the Navy, berthing, meaning sleeping quarters, shared sleeping quarters? What on earth are we doing? This is degrading readiness, degrading morale. The women no longer have any type of rights to privacy, obviously. We know that men who have transitioned to women or claim to be women in prisons have gotten women pregnant. We know this. So you're going to now have complete disarray. They're not serious. This is not a GS service where you're working as a government employee and you're 9 to 5. This is a deployment readiness issue. And this hormonal therapy, the surgeries that they're allowing these people to have, has got to be creating nothing but duress and stress upon the units and the unit cohesion. It's not about, do I care if you were a man or woman? Absolutely not. But I do care if you're impacting my ability to deploy or our unit's cohesion. But at the end of the day, nobody was denied being, you don't have a right to serve. You don't have a right to serve. You have to be capable of serving. That's why less than 15%, is probably barely above 10% of our youth today are even qualified to join the military. Why is that? Because we have obesity, we have criminal involvement, lack of education, inability to pass the mental health exams, the mental acuity test. You can go on and on with all the reasons. Most of our population is unqualified, unfit, and incapable of serving. in the prime age group of service. It is degrading, but yet they're going to now allow somebody to serve who has to have psychiatric care, has to have hormone treatment. Ridiculous. Then the Navy. Let's go to the cross dressers that they've had used for recruiting tools. What kind of culture are you trying to recruit to the military? Because dressing, first of all, I will say this: they are being exceptionally offensive toward women by having the grandiose hair, grandiose buttocks, grandiose breasts, where a female on active duty can't even dress like that, even in her civilian attire. But yet they mock the female form and make it a sexualized presentation by a man dressed like a woman on these ships and whatnot. That is, again, against good order and discipline, because if a woman were to do that, she probably would go through non-judicial punishment for acting like a stripper. You and I both know the women are scrutinized very closely, but yet a man can now mock women in their attire, and the Navy promotes this. It's become a joke. This diversity is not in our strength is not in our diversity. Our strength is in our capability. And you know, as an African-American man, as me as a female, that it wasn't easy to accomplish our goals. Did we meet people along the way that didn't like us for whatever reason? Yeah, but it didn't deter us, because we know in life, not everybody's ever going to like us. We have to work around all of that. And when I was on active duty, I will flat out say these were not issues for us. It was about doing your job, showing up on time, and performing your job to the best of the ability required for that position. It wasn't your ability. It was the ability required. And if you do that, you will be successful. But not everybody has a right to serve. That is obnoxious. That is not true. We are the biggest discriminator out there. You can't be too tall, too fat, too short, too thin. You can't have a multitude of issues. You must be able to serve. And sadly, we have a population today that's degraded itself so much that we have very few young people that can serve. And then out of that population, very few who are willing to serve. And why would they when all this nonsense is going on?
You know, it's interesting because we're talking about readiness and this whole gender dysphoria issue. You know, there is a waiver exemption that gender dysphoria, and mainly we're talking about males who are masquerading to be females. There is a waiver exemption where they can apply to not have to take any type of physical testing or physical readiness, like the APFT, the Army Physical Fitness Test, or the Marine Corps PFT, Physical Fitness Test. So that, once again, is a degradation on the readiness factor for our military, because you can be overweight, I guess. You can not have to take physical training. But I remember when the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, who I remember, serving with at Fort Bragg, and it's Fort Bragg, I don't know about this Fort Liberty thing, but where I remember we were serving at Fort Bragg with, back when he was a regimental commander in the 82nd Airborne Division. How would you have taken it when the Secretary of Defense issues a memorandum for the services that says to you, a female in the United States Armed Forces, that you now have to be ready to have biological males in your latrine facilities, or, like you said, birthing facilities if you're deployed on a ship, BERTHING facilities?
Yes, so first of all, for disclosure to all your audience, you're already well aware of this. I was against women fighting in ground combat with men, infantry units. First of all, women have 20% less 20% less lung capacity, 45% less muscle mass. You can't even equally defend yourself. I don't care if a woman passes the training. That's nonsense, because if you are now on a quota system where you have to have a certain percentage, that means a more qualified man physically is getting bumped, because there is no man who is going to not perform as there will be plenty of men who will outperform those women, particularly in our officer candidate school, where we were unable to even get it. The Marines were unable to even get, maybe over 20 women were unable to pass till they modified the standard. And that, to me, is just garbage, because at the end of the day, you're sweeping caves, you're in the field operations, and those women will not be able to equally defend themselves. I don't care if you're a United States Marine. When you're going in toe-to-toe, hand-to-hand combat, ISIS fighters were fighting on methamphetamines. You could not equally defend yourself. And I will give this analogy. The best MMA mixed martial arts fighter, female, against a mixed martial arts male fighter, he doesn't even have to be the best, is still going to get demolished and crushed. This is why we've been fighting against men playing in women's sports, biological men now pretending to be women. So how is this, to your argument, how is this appropriate? How is this fair that now the men are now claiming to be women? They're going to be held to a lower standard for physical fitness, which many men resent, by the way. But the physical fitness test is not a grade of equality. It is a grade of fitness.
Mhm.
You have other tests, combat readiness tests, things of that nature that we have to maintain a certain standard, unassuredly so. But women in the Marine Corps still run 3 miles as the men run 3 miles. But a male maxing it, I believe, has to hit 19 minutes. A female has to hit 21 minutes. That's because, again, it's a grade of fitness. It's not a grade of combat readiness. And a lot of men get mad at me when I say that. They're like, well, if you're so equal, why don't you have the same test? Because I don't have the same muscle mass or lung capacity. However, now they're demolishing the roles of women, and now women are going to be systematically replaced by men portraying to be women. They will be able to take advantage of many of these opportunities to have a lower test score opportunity, which can accelerate promotion. It's absurd. This is not what the civil rights movement was about with equality. Even most conservative gay men and women that I know are upset and infuriated by this because now they have tried to piggyback off the rights that gays and have earned and worked for to now make their rights, but it's not the same thing. You know, you could be a perfectly, as Greg Gutfeld said, you could be a perfectly healthy gay male, but now you're going through hormone treatment in the masquerading as a woman. It's a mental disorder that is now filtered into the military. And I think the military trying to accommodate this when you're talking about such a low percentile of people that are in this group, but yet will have such a insignificant impact on morale and cohesion in the military. It's degrading from the rights and respect and dignity that those unit members depend upon each other. You're right. I just find it obscene that in prisons where the transgender men have managed, or transgender women have been impregnating women, you don't think that's going to happen now in birthing quarters? You know, you have some type of issue that is never going to be something that will assist this esprit de corps that the military depends upon in combat, particularly in combat. I mean, you and I were not desk jockeys. We didn't sit back in the rear with the gear. We actually did field operations. We actually got out there. You far more than myself. I can't even compare myself to you. But when my field operations were going, I was in open showers. We were in a birthing area that was open, wide open. There was no element of privacy. And this is when I was a senior staff non-commissioned officer. We're not even talking about when I was in recruit training. So, you know, any conservative, anybody who's logical, anybody who's rational, when they hear my argument about why women should not have been in ground combat, they understand. And now it's drip, drip, drip. Now we are dealing with transgender issues. It's now anybody, everybody, go ahead and serve. And when I look at a lot of people in military uniform, you're probably the same way as I am when I see them at the airport and they're fat and they're hiding under that camouflage uniform. They look like the Pillsbury Doughboy in a camouflage uniform. I mean, it is ridiculous at the fitness standard getting degraded, and it's embarrassing for those of us who honor and respect what that uniform means. And then you got the civilian guilt out there congratulating all of them. Thank you for your service. And you and I are rolling our eyes because it's like, no, they're manipulative people that are using the system for their own benefit.
You know, it's very encouraging to hear you speak on this issue. I wish that there were more of the quote unquote feminists that are out there addressing this issue. But you're right. It is much the same as in the Middle East, they say, never let the camel get his nose under the tent because the rest of the body will follow. A lot of these things that you're talking about got started in the Obama administration, all of these policies. The next thing we've got, females going into Ranger school. And of course, they're allowed to recycle until they're finally passed. We're talking about females being in the, Green Beret and even, Marine Special Operations uniform. There's talk about females being Navy SEALs, but you're correct in that it cancels out someone that you need to be out there in one of these operational uniforms just to say that, wow, look at us and the social engineering that we're doing. Which brings me to the next thing that I'd like to discuss with you that I think undermines our readiness and the good order and discipline of our military is this whole cultural Marxism that is occurring in our military, where we're really trying to create more separation and divisiveness in our military. And now we've hired these, I call them, leftist commissars who are out there pushing this agenda. How can you have the readiness and effective fighting force if we're saying because of my skin color, I'm a victim, I'm oppressed, because of your skin color, I guess you're Karen and you're, privileged and all of this type of stuff. why do you think the left is so hell bent on implementing this ideological agenda of theirs and expending taxpayer money, and to include, the murdering of unborn babies now, supporting that? Why do you think they're hell bent on destroying our military and showing this weakness on the international stage?
I can't get in their head because you and I come from a completely different rational thought process of what the primary mission of the military is: to overwhelm and to destroy the enemy.
Mhm.
That very few will have the qualifications to serve, and fewer will sustain, let alone retire from it. We know this. And it's turned it upside down. It's become an equal opportunity mission to ensure that there's diversity, and they're trying to convince people diversity is in your strength. I don't know about you, but I didn't have any problem with diversity in my units. We didn't have any problem with having a wide range of Latinos and women and men. I will admit there were fewer numbers of women, and I was completely okay with that due to the mission and readiness issues of the Marine Corps, as it should be the way it is. We're supposed to be warriors of men that are never afraid to kill and destroy. And it was a difference of mindset that we had. I don't know why they're doing this, other than exactly what you said, that it will eradicate the function of our U.S. military and make us follow some type of Marxist agenda, but to our own detriment. Let's talk about Tommy Tuberville. Everybody out there, make sure you support what he's doing, because they have essentially rewritten the rules and blaming Republicans and Tommy Tuberville for not allowing these promotions. Amy Klobuchar had put out a tweet going after Tommy Tuberville because the Marine Corps, for its first time in history, doesn't have a commandant. And I thought, lady, you could care less about the Marine Corps. This is about your abortion agenda. You know it, and I know it. And honestly, the Marine Corps doesn't have a commandant. They know darn well how to put somebody in as an interim leader and still keep functioning. They are not going to collapse. The Corps itself is a foundation of historical capability. In fact, we didn't always have 4-star generals, as we both know. We've had colonels run the Marine Corps, because you know what? All it takes is somebody who is brilliant, capable, and understands what it is to overwhelm and destroy the enemy. That doesn't necessarily come with another star on your shoulder that suddenly you have more brilliance. You and I both know sometimes the closer they get to that Pentagon, the more politicized and stupid they get, because now they're influenced by money and this and that. So I almost tweeted back at Amy Klobuchar, but I just said, I'm going to leave this one alone, because that's not where the battle needs to be maintained. It needs to be maintained by Tuberville, because they also can go and actually get these folks promoted. I forgot what it's called, the measure that the Senate can do, individual promotions. But they just want to make this a political thing. Here's the case, people. There's no state in the United States that has outlawed abortion, not one. So this is a false argument that they are stating. When I was stationed overseas, I remember a female Marine that wanted to receive an abortion, and she went to family services on base and asked about a facility that was off base overseas, and she was still able to accomplish that discreetly, unable to go back to work. So what I'm getting at is nobody's being denied access to legal health care. It's illegal for it to be funded by taxpayers. And now they're trying to justify paying for not necessarily the abortion, but leave, time off, travel, you name it. But yet, as we know, many of the families that I believe it was Sergeant Nicole G's family, they were not able to even get her body transported back to Washington, D.C. from Sacramento when she had her funeral. Like, they are denying some of the more significant things for those who have died on active duty and the bereavement for those families. But, let's make sure we set aside time, vacation time, or leave time for women who have abortions. That is displaced priorities, number one. Number two, most women on active duty understand the concepts of how they would be pregnant, okay? This is not some rampant issue on active duty. They make it sound like we got to have an abortion mill for these people on active duty. There's not a single location they're stationed they won't have access to that healthcare, number one. Number two, it is a lie. This is promoting this, that camel nose, getting under there to promote their agenda. That next step would be having the taxpayers fund it, and it would be conducted on your Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines locations, in their facilities. And it's like just obnoxious, because now the taxpayers are funding for the end of life, which we all know is illegal, even though Planned Parenthood manages to squeeze out how many millions of dollars out of government taxpayers. I digress.
Yeah, 500 million. I know that very well, and it's a shame that we have pro-life advocacy centers that have to go out and have fundraisers and beg, borrow, and steal. Or you even have in Pennsylvania just recently, where Governor Shapiro there said that they're going to not allow any funding for pro-life advocacy centers. Last question before I let you go, because we just crossed an incredible threshold here in the United States of America, $33 trillion in debt. That's what we owe to creditors for the United States of America. I mean, I don't think that I could get $33,000 in debt. I don't want to be $3,300 in debt. But the real issue with that is the net interest of the debt, that payment. We're getting real close where the net interest of the debt of the United States of America, I think it's about 780 billion, almost $800 billion. It's almost greater than our defense budget. What is the threat to our readiness when the net interest on our debt is almost greater than the budget that we spend to, as the Constitution says in the preamble, to provide for the common defense?
Okay, so I want to put something in context. Years ago, when I was on active duty, I attended an organization called Blacks in Government. I was an equal opportunity advisor for a period of time. And it was actually a very interesting symposium. And they had a Bush representative come, and somebody was upset about the debt. We're going long ago, Bush era. And I think we had hit about the 80% mark of our GDP. And the goal is to never get over 75% or whatever the number is. We have passed that, and now we're 100% plus of our GDP in debt.
130% thereabouts. 130%.
Easily. But the claim was back then, as long as you never exceeded what your GDP was, you would be fine. That ship has sailed. I've heard people talk nonstop about the economy collapsing. You and I both see the TV commercials to invest in gold and silver. Although I dare to say, I don't know where I'd buy anything with gold or silver, because if it hits the fan, it hits the fan. And where we are today can't even sustain. Our Defense Department now would not even be able to be sustained. We are looking at an economic travesty. And one thing, for full disclosure, I was the co-chair of Veterans for Trump. And one thing I really respect when I listened to President Trump speak one of the last times, a few speeches ago, was about how he would get us out of debt. He said it's quite simple. You get our energy production back on. You get that Anwar province working up there in Alaska. You make sure that we have the Keystone Pipeline working again, and the amount of profit and money that can come from that to get economic prosperity. He really was talking about this fiscal management instead of this this consistent funding of endless projects. Recently, I was on a show that talked about the UN speeches, and they were talking about how, it's this one guy on the left was saying, well, it's only 5% of our budget that we are funding the Ukraine. That's insignificant. The Defense Department, you would find more money being spent. I said, is that kind of mindset is why we have the trillions of dollars of debt now? Because I don't remember who it was that said, at some point, you're talking about real money.
Yes.
And $70 billion going to the Ukraine, to most of us, we can't even wrap our head around that. And it's that constant 5% here, 3% there, 20% here, whatever it may be. And that's why we have excessive spending to a point that is going to impact our national security. China is a great threat. We know Taiwan is under surveillance. We know Taiwan could be hit any day, and it wouldn't shock either of us. We know there is no end in sight with the Ukraine. We've been talking about that for how many years now? We don't have a strategy. We don't see Secretary Blinken hitting the pavement, trying to get negotiations of some sort to go. We know that we have serious threats when we're sending money to Iran, $6 billion to Iran, that's only going to fund more terrorism. We have to get radical people in office who are not willing to write one more check unless we have money that is not, if you're going to take it, spend money, you got to cut money. That was the deal for a little while, but it seemed like it went nowhere.
It's interesting because, my biggest concern, I live down here in Texas, and I've been down to the border countless amounts of times, and we have a national security crisis right here. And, we're sending billions of dollars for another country to protect and secure their border, yet we're just, really dismissing our very own border. And to me, that's a violation of our Constitution. To me, it's
Absolutely.
an impeachable and treasonous offense. Jessie Jane Duff, where can people follow you? Where can people stay in touch with you and all of the good work you're doing for AFPI as an ambassador there and also as a Newsmax contributor?
Well, the biggest place I'm active is probably on Twitter at Jessie Jessie Jane Jane Duff Duff. That's the same handle. I'm not that creative on Truth, on Getter, and Facebook and Instagram, but I don't really use those accounts as actively. Twitter's just a much easier platform for me. I do have a website. Again, very simple, jessiejaneduff.com. Nothing too difficult here. But all in all, I'm on Newsmax several times a week, usually on Wednesdays. And today I'll be on, I'm on 3 times a week, usually Monday, Wednesday, Fridays. So you usually can just spot me here and there. I got a big mouth, so I'm not hard to find.
Well, most Marines have big mouths. I'm just kidding.
Marines, no, you're serious. There's a lady told me one time, she knew I was a Marine because I was loud and funny. She says, Marines were loud and funny. And I thought, yep, that sums it up.
And effective. How can people reach out to you if they want to book you for a speaking engagement to talk about some of the issues we just discussed here today?
It's quite easy. My website has a email, Jessie at jessiejaneduff.com. It's pretty easy. JESSIE at jessiejaneduff.com.
Well, I cannot thank you enough for joining us here at Live Free TV. And the important thing is that we cannot live free if we cannot protect ourselves. And that's why we need a good, strong deterrent force with our United States military, not an ideological force, which it seems what the progressive socialist left wants to do. And without a doubt, we cannot protect our constitutional rights unless we are doing everything that is necessary to ensure that the Constitution is supported and defended. And that's the oath that you and I took. So God bless you all. Semper Fidelis, Marine. And thank you for being with us here at Live Free TV.
Thank you.